China, Russia, and India are teaming up because they want to dethrone the United States as the world's superpower. And this is something you might want to pay attention to as an investor here in the United States. But let me explain. The BRICS nations have come together to try to dethrone the United States as the world's superpower. BRICS stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. At first, no one really cared. But now it's starting to get more interesting as BRICS are recruiting more countries. As of January 2025, BRICS includes 10 different nations, including Indonesia, and their goal is to reduce their dependence on the United States dollar, build their own political alliance, and have more influence on global trade. In other words, they don't want the United States and the United States dollar to have as much power as they do. So let me grab my whiteboard and show you what's going on. The BRICS nations currently make up around 41% of our global GDP, that is our global economy. Now we could compare this number to the United States, which in 2023, the United States GDP made up around 13% of our global economy, but that's not really comparing apples to apples because here we have a group of nations and the United States is just one, so we can compare the BRICS nations against the G7 nations. What is the G7 nations? This is again a group of countries that's comprised of Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the United Kingdom, the United States, and additionally the European Union. So in simple terms, the G7 is the clique that the United States is a part of, and the G7 GDP makes up around 30% of the global GDP. What we saw is in the last couple of years that the BRICS nation GDP number actually outpaced and grew bigger than the G7 nations, which means yes, as of the last few years, the BRICS nations comprise themselves of a larger portion of the global GDP than the G7 nations. But that's not all. Let's go a little bit deeper. By the way, if you find this type of stuff interesting, you will love Market Briefs. Market Briefs is my free financial newsletter where my team is breaking down what's happening in things like our economy, the global economy, the housing market, the stock market, and the crypto market into a fun and witty and easy to read newsletter. We break down the top financial news stories like this, and you can read it in less than 5 minutes every morning. We have hundreds of thousands of investors that read Market Briefs every morning, and it's completely free. So if you'd like to join Market Briefs for free, I got the link to how you can join down in the description below. If we take a look at the share of the global population of the BRICS nations versus the G7 nations, the BRICS nations make up around 40% of the global population versus the G7 nations make up around 10% of the global population. Is this good? Is that bad? I'll leave that up to your imagination, but what we know is that the G7 nations are making more money per capita, meaning per person, compared to the BRICS nations, but the BRICS nations have a lot more people compared to the G7 nations. And then if we take a look at how fast the average country is growing in the BRICS nations versus the G7 nations, what we'll see is that the BRICS nations have an average growth rate of around 3.6% versus countries in the G7 nations have an average economic growth rate of around 1%. So these countries are growing a whole lot faster. Now let's get a little bit more granular. In the beginning of this video, I talked about how the BRICS nations want to dethrone the United States as the world's superpower. But why? The reason why is because the United States dollar is the world's reserve currency. And that's something that gives you a lot of clout and a lot of power. But instead of talking in slang, let me show you what that actually means. This is from Investopedia. Being the world's reserve currency means that a large percentage of commodities, such as gold and oil, are priced in the reserve currency, causing other countries to hold this currency to pay for their goods. That means when you are the world's reserve currency, like the United States dollar is, the world is required to buy certain commodities like oil using your currency, which means countries around the world have to value your currency, and that might mean that they're holding on to your currency, which gives more power to your currency, which gives more growth to your economy and your people. And so you can start to see why that world's reserve currency gives you so much power, because oil is the most traded commodity in the world. So there's a lot of money in oil. And if the world is required to trade oil in dollars, well, that means a lot of countries are holding on to dollars. That's very good news for the United States. In fact, you might have heard the term petrodollar before. Well, that's exactly what this means. The global oil trade has been predominantly conducted in United States dollars, creating a symbiosis between America's currency and the world's most traded commodity. That's why it's so powerful being the world's reserve currency, because that means the world operates on your currency, that gives more power to your currency, and that makes you a richer nation, especially when your currency is a fiat currency. Fiat currency meaning it's just a piece of paper. our dollars are not backed by physical gold, they're pieces of paper. And so being the world's reserve currency gives the United States the ability to spend a lot of money, even if we don't have it. And the reason why we can do that isn't just because the Federal Reserve Bank will write the blank checks, it's because the world will accept that. Because we are the world's reserve currency and the world will still recognize the United States dollar no matter how many dollars we print, essentially. But this is where you're starting to see some people get concerned because we're starting to see things change, especially as we're starting to see the growth of these BRICS nations. For example, in 2023, it was big headlines that countries, namely BRICS countries, started or tried to start trading oil with currencies other than the dollar. Now you can start to see how that can pose some concerns. For example, JP Morgan Chase Bank published this article on their website towards the end of 2024. De-dollarization. Is the United States dollar losing its dominance? But that's not all. If you've been reading market briefs, you also know that BRICS nations have been buying up physical gold in order to help strengthen their currencies. Over the last couple of years, if you've been following the financial news at all, you might have heard that gold prices are breaking new record highs. One of the reasons for that is that central banks around the world have been ramping up their gold buying to strengthen their currencies, potentially preparing themselves for any sort of economic trade war. Now, I know that a lot of this can sound scary, but I want to be completely transparent here and have you understand the full 360 picture. The first part of that is the United States is the world's largest holder of gold reserves. And it's not like the BRICS nations don't have their own concerns as well. For example, Brazil has been facing lots of issues with corruption, China is facing their own debt crisis, and Russia is facing a lot of economic sanctions. But that doesn't mean we should ignore all the economic concerns we have in the United States. Namely, that we're growing our debt much faster than our economy. Take a look. In 2014, the GDP in the United States was around $17.6 trillion large. That is, again, our economy. By the end of 2024, our economy had grown to around $27.9 trillion, or it's estimated to be around there, which is a growth of around 59%. But this is where it gets interesting. Over that same time period, our national debt grew from around $17.8 trillion to a little bit over $36.3 trillion. That's an increase of around 103%. Which means over the last decade, we have seen our national debt levels in the United States grow almost twice as fast as our economy. And that's a concern, especially when we keep spending more and more money, but our economy isn't keeping up with all that money spending. This is why in the beginning of December 2024, Jerome Powell, who is the chairman at the Federal Reserve Bank, said that the United States government spending is going down an unsustainable path. And then in the last few days of December 2024, Janet Yellen, who's a Treasury Secretary in the United States, says that now the government has to start taking, quote, extraordinary measures to avoid a potential debt default in the United States. Why? Because the impact of this growth of national debt, the growth of all this money printing and spending, can create inflation. Now, of course, we've been hearing inflation worries still in the United States. However, it's not as bad as it is in many other countries. So yes, we are very fortunate in the United States that our problems here aren't as bad as many other countries in the world. We're also very fortunate here that we have the strongest economy in the world. We're also very fortunate here that we have the strongest government, we have the strongest military, and we have the strongest currency. But the concern that many people have is, are we in an empire that's on its way down? And if it is, how long do we have? Now, nobody knows the answer to that. But what we do know is that the United States has been resilient, and it will probably continue to be resilient. Personally, I'm very bullish on the United States. Do we have concerns? Absolutely. Do we have risks? Absolutely. But I still believe that there's opportunities. But this means you need to be smart and you need to be able to find the investment opportunities. But in order for you to find the investment opportunities, you have to have money to invest. That means you have to understand how to actually put money aside and then understand how do you actually invest your money. Now that's going to be a very big deviation from this video itself, but I want you to understand that anytime you hear risk, anytime you hear concern, for most people that just means panic. For most people that just means fear. For most people that just creates all these emotions, angry, scared, whatever it might be. For financially savvy investors, that means it's time to look for opportunities. That's what I want you to think about. How can this create an investment opportunity for you? Now, of course, we have market briefs as a resource for you to start paying attention to what's happening in the financial markets, but this is where you can also invest in your financial education and your investor education. That way you can learn how to invest your money, how to have money to invest, And how do you actually start deploying your money? Finding the right investment opportunities for you, because the reality is this economic system is designed to benefit investors. Hate it or love it, that's the name of the game. And most of us are never taught this. That's why I want you to understand, hey, our economy is changing, it's going to be changing, it has changed in the past, and if you want to win in this economic system, you have to learn how our economy works, you have to learn how money works, and you have to have the money to be able to invest. And with that, I want to hear from you. Do you think what's going on with the BRICS nations is a real concern and something that we should be paying more attention to? Or do you think it's just overblown and the United States is safe and there's nothing to worry about? Let me know down in the comments. I'm looking forward to reading what you have to say. Let's assume that you make $5,000 a month. After taxes, you will be left around $3,833 a month. Now, when you get this $3,833 a month, you pay your rent, you pay your mortgage, you pay your groceries, you pay for some nice stuff here and there, and then you have no money to save and invest. So this is what we're gonna do differently.